Okay, so first off, just a general uh, definition about what low impact development is. So as you've heard from our other two presenters, the way that we develop on the land can affect stormwater runoff. And so what you're seeing here is that this is a flow versus time chart is called a hydrograph. And what I'm showing here is sort of an example, hypothetical stormwater runoff hydrograph, flow on the y-axis and time on the x-axis under native non-developed site conditions. So if you had land use that looked something like what you see in the left photo over here, that you'd have flow over time that is relatively flat, kind of a slow progression of stormwater running over a watershed. And in those conditions, you have low flow rates coming off those pieces of land. And you also have little, relatively small amounts of runoff volume leaving because there's so much time for things to infiltrate and percolate down to groundwater. What happens when we develop our land? So now we've got a shopping mall on a piece of property and lots of impervious surfaces. And so under developed conditions, that hydrograph changes. And you can see there's a swift peak to that flow, and then it comes down over time. So it's pretty different than what we see under undeveloped conditions. And also in that kind of runoff under developed conditions, we have more volume leaving the site as well. And you can see that in the difference between the curves. So that red line compared to the yellow line, that red area represents extra runoff volume that gets delivered downstream. So in developed conditions, we have water running out faster and in more volume downstream. And that has an impact on downstream water bodies. I don't need to spend a lot of time on this because other presenters touched on this really nicely. There are many impacts of stormwater runoff on downstream water bodies. So there's things like flooding, but also lots of water quality implications, such as stream bank erosion that carries sediments and nutrients to downstream lakes and rivers, pollutants that get carried, which result in algal blooms. There's also a lot of loss of groundwater recharge when we're paving over large sections of land in our watersheds, and that has implications to downstream water bodies as well. So I wanted to introduce you to the concept of a first flush. I don't know if any of you have heard this concept before, but it's an important term in stormwater that is relevant to our discussion about low impact development today. So stormwater's first flush is the initial portion of stormwater runoff from a rainfall event that typically contains a higher concentration of pollutants than subsequent runoff. And this matters because understanding and addressing the first flush is really important for urban stormwater management because it can significantly impact water quality in receiving streams and rivers. And the pollutants in this first flush are things like sediments, nutrients, organic matter, heavy metals, pathogens, and other contaminants that have accumulated on urban surfaces during dry periods. So when we're talking about the best way to make a water quality improvement to downstream water bodies through development practices up in a watershed, we talk about capturing that first flush because that's the dirtiest bit of runoff that's going to come off a site. So we're not worried about all the stormwater that might run off a site. We're really mostly worried about the first bit, the first fraction of an inch.